Hey everybody, thanks for sticking around. I think I might be one of the last few sessions that are happening, so thank you for stopping by. So today I'm gonna talk a little bit about how Grepr's real-time machine learning can actually help you get 100% of the observability that you're seeing today at 10% of the cost. I'll start with a little bit talking about the AI for telemetry problem, because that's something that people always face, and I'll talk about extracting signal from that data so you can actually feed it into AI, and I'll talk a bit about how Grepr works to get there. So if you think about how people have been working with observability for the past, 15, 20 years, it all started with full stack observability, where you would collect the data from the agents, send it into an application, and that application, that aggregator, is a full stack aggregator, kind of a walled garden that defines what you can actually do with that application, not more, with that data. And then over time, we started seeing more openness in these observability platforms, more modularization, where OTel came in as a protocol to separate the data collection from the data aggregators, and then we started seeing telemetry pipelines as well. And so what happens after that is we want to enable AI-powered ops and workflows, and this is what everybody's talking about today. We want to empower SREs and DevOps to be able to handle enormously more complex operations and systems. But the biggest problem with AI systems today is that the data is just enormous, and it's mostly noise. So everything that you're collecting is maybe you'll ever need maybe 1% of it. And if you were to feed all that data into an AI model and tell it, hey, figure out what's actually in there, it's really garbage in and garbage out. And so the biggest problem with using AI for observability is the ability to denoise the data and figure out how to concentrate it so you can actually have clean data for these systems. And really, that's what Grepr does. So the way Grepr works is you start, let's say, with your existing deployments, you're collecting data, logs, traces, metrics. That data is going into your observability vendor, maybe Splunk, Datadog, Grafana, whatever it is. And Grepr sits in the middle. We automatically figure out what is noisy, what's not noisy, what are all the patterns that are in your data, and we use that to figure out how much volume is actually passing through each of those patterns. And we can use that pattern to understand, okay, how do we give you full coverage of your application by passing through data for all of those patterns and making sure that we don't miss anything that might be useful. And so this is all automatic. It works out of the box. We automatically look at the data. We automatically figure out what are the patterns. We can operate on millions of patterns in the data. Today we're doing this for logs and traces, and we're building metrics next year. So the way that Grepr works for logs is as the data's passing through, in real time, we're figuring out what are the patterns in those logs. And so here in this example, we're seeing that, hey, there's two patterns in the data. There's these gets and then there's these posts. And what we do is we pass through those initial few samples for each of those patterns. And once we have enough samples, then we say, hey, we've seen enough of those log messages. Let's actually start reducing them. And then at the end of a 2-minute window, we'll send you a summary saying, hey, we've seen this much of this pattern, we've seen that much of this pattern. And we can also aggregate data inside of those patterns so that we can say things like we've seen an average latency of this much, or this many bytes actually passed through. So this allows you to get exactly the data that you need, high signal data, passed through downstream, whether to AI models or down to your observability vendor. And all of this is super configurable, so you can make it be 1 minute instead of 2 minutes. You can change and decide, hey, I don't want to aggregate this pattern, I want to pass it through. We do things like automatically figure out what are the logs that are powering your dashboards and alerts, and we can automatically add them into Grepr so that we don't modify or we don't change your workflows and impact them if you roll it out. For traces, we do something similar. So if you're familiar with tail sampling, the way that it works is you look at the endpoints of the traces, like where they're hitting, where they're getting started, and then you start looking at the performance of each of those endpoints. But there's a problem here. What if that endpoint is sometimes cached and sometimes not cached? So that means that your data or your traces actually have different paths depending on whether the data is cached or not. So in this example, we're seeing all of the traces actually starting at a circle. And we have two red ones. One is actually has only 2 hops, and the other one has 4 hops, 3 hops, something like that. And so you want to actually look at the performance of these 2 paths differently, even though they start at the same endpoint. And so what we do is we actually look at the full structure of every trace to map out your entire application and be able to understand, okay, here are all the things that we need to pass through and make sure that the end user is aware of. Then we keep track of the performance of each of those different signatures of these full structures, which allows us to understand when is this particular path slow and when is that particular path fast. And then we can drop the noisy data, the stuff that's actually unnecessary, and give you full sampling across your entire application so we can cover everything. But ultimately, no data is ever lost. So what we do is we put all the raw data into an observability data lake, which allows us to keep that data at low cost for a very long time. You can keep it as long as you want it to. And it can always be queried. You can, if you ever wanted to go find a log message from 6 months ago, you can go and look at it. You don't have to do a hydration. But if you wanted to, you could go and backfill that data back into your observability vendor. Or you could have it be triggered to be manually backfilled or automatically backfilled. So you can hook up this backfill, let's say, to a ticketing system. If a customer opens a particular ticket, maybe you want to go and load all the logs that are relevant for that customer, or all the traces that are relevant for that customer. Or maybe you have some anomaly or fraud detection system that you want to hook up so that when an analyst finds that there's an anomaly, they're already, all the logs are already there in your end system for them to go and troubleshoot. And what we've seen as results are very encouraging from our customers. We see over 90% reduction in many cases with very minimal impact to developer workflows. Grepr usually takes about 30 minutes to get started with. You just set it up, you point your existing agents into Grepr, and Grepr automatically starts working to figure out what are all the patterns, do the compression, and send the data through. So this changes that conversation with your developers or your SREs who are trying to figure out, okay, well, how do I even get started? I've got 100 teams, they're all using logs or traces, and I need to really cut down this spend, but I'm not really sure where to start. Do I start looking at patterns one by one and adding drop filters and sampling rates for these patterns? What we do is we just set it up automatically for you. And that changes the conversation from being, hey, here's a blank slate, do something, learn this thing, get certified in it, to a place where it's actually more about tuning. So you set it up, it starts working, you look at the data that's passing through, you can make decisions, is this good? Is this enough? Do I need more? And you could do that as time moves on, because ultimately there's no risk. The data's all in the data lake, so if you ever needed something that isn't actually forwarded, you can always go back into the data lake to fetch it. You'll always find everything there. But this makes it really easy to roll out Grepr with the assurance that your data is going to be there without impacting workflows and actually increasing MTTR. Thank you. This is a very quick talk because Grepr is actually very fast and easy to describe. But I'm happy to take any questions since we've got about 10 minutes left.